Hey everybody. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for the introduction. Without wasting so much time, I'm just going to get started. I tried my best actually to be at the in-person event, but I could not get a day to the embassy, so that's why I'm doing this talk remotely. So fingers crossed, next year I'll be able to you know, be there in person. And thank you so much, All Things Open, to the whole organizing team for always bringing me on. Thank you so much. So today my talk is basically very personal because I have worked in an open source community and I know how things are being done there, and it's really different from how the corporate life is. So my talk today is basically approaching developer relations and open source community. Now, so let's just get started. So who am I? So I am a developer relations engineer at Platform.sh. Like Jennifer said, I am also a technical writer at Log Rocket and Smash Magazine. I do my bit of technical writing when I have free time. I am an Auth0 ambassador, and I am an open source community Africa core team member. So if I don't know if you've heard about open source community Africa, you probably must have heard about it. If you've not, we are like a open source community here in Africa, probably the only and the biggest. So we do a bit of bringing more people into open source. So personally, I'm very much passionate about open source software generally. So let's just get started. So this entire talk is based off my article on how we approach developer relations at the Cloud Foundry Foundation, which is a very large open source community during my time there. So if you need to check it out, when I share the links, when I share the slides with the organizers, you can just quickly go to this link and read more if you need to read anything. So so developer relations, I always say something. Developer relations isn't just for corporate companies, right? Isn't this just for big tech companies? It's developer relations is for every community of developers. So wherever you find developers, you can developer relations is actually needed there. As long as developer are together, developer relations. So you might not necessarily call it developer relations, right? My community management is under developer relations. I don't know if most people don't know, but the community management under developer relations. So when you manage a community, when you try to look for the best interest of your members, which are mostly developers, designers, and maybe technical writers, that's actually developer relations, because there's developers there's a software you're trying to get people to use, and you're advocating for. So that process, that entire process, actually you are carrying out, developer relations. So before we get started, before we go deep into the conversation today, because I like to call my talks a conversation, because it's basically me trying to convince you on my opinion on something. So I hope I convince you and not confuse you actually on developer relations in an open source community. So let's just get started. So what is developer relations basically? So Mary is actually a very big. I'm a very big fan of Mary. So Mary wrote a book on developer relations. I think it's the business of developer relations, and it's one of the most interesting book I've read in developer relations generally. So I follow her blog from time to time. I think Mary is at All Things Open now, so I think I saw a tweet from her. So maybe if you can see this, shout out to Mary. And so Mary said, I like to use this definition everywhere. So Mary said it's a group of developer advocates, technical community managers, technical ambassadors, documentation writers, trainers, and more, who all exist to empower you, that's a developer, to do your best work. So developer relations is a very large field, right? Different type of careers are under developer relations, not just developer advocates in quotes. We have technical community managers, program managers, technical ambassadors, documentation writers. Very important. These are I think we sideline technical writers out of communities way too much, and these are people that actually do the main work, right? These are people that make sure that we can read what the software is about. So we should never ever be neglected. I mean, without the documentation, you take a longer time to understand the switch software works. So trainers and more, so many other people on that developer relations ecosystem. So these people, this group of people, this umbrella of people basically work hard every day to make sure that you and I, developers, can do our best work. it comes in various form. It could be through, writing documentation. It could be through, doing webinars. It could be doing trainings. So many ways this group of people actually make sure that me and you, the developers, can easily and work very, very efficiently. So that's what developer relations is. It's more of a body, an encompassing body of various other people under it, rather than just a concept, right? It's more of various people under it. So we should definitely try not to neglect the people that are doing the work, right? By just calling it the concept. So like I said, developer relations is different, right? Developer relations in the open source community is different from the way to be in a closed corporate world, right? The way it's different because a lot of things you do way more marketing, you have way more budgets when you are like in a closed corporate environment. You do more marketing, have way more budget to do certain things. But in an open source community where things are being done voluntarily, and when it comes to budget, it's you get money from sponsors, so it's not like it's a consistent flow of income generally. And so the way developer relations is being done there should vary, right? Should vary from the way it's being done in a corporate environment. So what is developer relations to OSS communities? So like it is basically caring about developers, you know, I don't want to just use developers, so I'm going to make sure I say designers, technical writers, just so I don't neglect anybody. Um, Developers, designers, technical writers, caring about them, educating, growing, and collecting feedback from the community. So the community are like, everybody that makes up that particular community is the community. Developer relations can come in any form, like community management, documentation writing, etc. Like I said, it's more of the people that are doing the work rather than a concept. So when you care about your developers in your community, you educate them, you try to make them grow with you. That's try to make everybody in the community grow at a certain pace, and you collect feedback from the community on how how can we do better, how can we make using this particular software even better. Here's a link, here's a form. Can you give us feedback on how we can make this particular community even better? So that whole process, that whole process can also be categorized under developer relations. It's a very, very important process because the people you have in mind are developers, and you're trying so hard to make sure that this particular group of people are really, really catered for and are empowered to do their best work. I call developer relations people are people that make you and I, which are developers, do our best work. So because without developer relations people, you really, really cannot use so many software. So we are like the reason why most developers can really do their best work. We try our best. Developers are at the is at the heart of developer relations. They are the biggest pain points in developer relations. So it could come in any form, like community management, documentation writing, making tutorial videos. And there are tons of free tutorial videos out there that people can use to learn XYZ software. That's part of developer relations. You're making sure that developers can learn efficiently. So the question is now, why should OSS communities care about developer relations? This is a very, very interesting question because I've seen like, open source subject communities are, I cannot impose certain things on open source subject communities, right? Because most of the work being done there is voluntarily. But, it would be very, very it would be very, very weird for me to say that this is a must. It's not a must, right? Everybody does work in an open source community voluntarily, but yeah, when anything that is worth doing well, right? So why should OSS communities care about developer relations? So why should OSS communities care about their developers, people using people using the software, right? Why should they care? Now, first, like I said initially, right? Developers are at the core of every open source software communities. You cannot argue that fact. Developers are at the core of every open source community because you cannot make a software and expect a let's say a doctor to use that particular software. Like, you cannot make a developers focused software and expect a doctor to use that particular software. It's not exactly ideal, right? It doesn't make any sense for the most part. I could be wrong, but the best of my knowledge, it doesn't make any sense. So the main people, the target audience of every open source software is developers, right? I made this particular plugin to make sure that people can integrate XYZ, and it's open source. You can go and download it, install it, and use it. If you have any feedback, submit an issue. That's it. Developers are the core of every open source software community. Now, when supporting developers basically creates a sense of empathy towards developers. I mean, we are all human beings, right? Empathy is something I personally preach every day. Like, always, treat everything empathy. When I'm building, like, a UI, when I'm building a UI, let me say, when I used to work, like, production, write production code to build UIs and rest. Empathy is really, really a very, very interesting thing, because it sends a message, like, I care about you. When we care about each other, there's this really, really nice feeling about it. So when you carry out developer relation efforts in your community, your audience, your community generally, there's this sense of empathy. They feel like, okay, I'm actually cared about. My opinion actually matters. My voice is actually heard. So it creates a sense of empathy towards developers. The next thing is, it empowers developers to be able to utilize the software properly. So, I mean, like I said, if your documentation is not great, developers cannot effectively utilize your software. Now, updating and updating your documentation consistently to meet certain standards, to make sure that you cover every single concept. That process is you caring about your developers, and that's all what developer relation entails. You understand? That's basically what it entails. So, um, when you have a great documentation, your software can be utilized properly. When you have tutorials, when you have meetups to talk about this particular software, it's really, really makes developers to be able to utilize, because I cannot know every single thing about a software. I cannot know how to use a particular, I might be wrong, but I cannot know how to use a particular software more than the creator, right? More than the community creating it. So this group of people are more knowledgeable than me in a particular in that particular aspect. So it's up to them. It's their job to actually tell me, this is how to use XYZ. Do you know you can actually use this and do this and it works? So this when you care about developer relations, it would basically empower your developers to be able to utilize a particular software properly. So the next thing is, it enables collaboration internally and between other communities. So developer relations, when it's actually really, really taken seriously, when everybody sees that, okay, the let's say the community leaders, because every community usually have a leader, the community leaders are trying their best to make sure that everybody gets what they need, everything is catered for. The community members will say, oh, I think I can help out here. So this particular thing basically encourages a sense of collaboration internally. Everybody wants to like help out. Everybody wants to do XYZ. Everybody wants to write more tutorials on XYZ. Everybody wants to tell their story on how this particular software is helping them where they work or in their daily lives. So it encourages that collaboration. Then the most interesting part is how it connects with other communities, right? So for example, what analogy I'm probably going to use right now. Let's say the React community, and let's say the MongoDB community, right? MongoDB people, everybody uses, like, a lot of people use MongoDB, a lot of people use React. Now, when these two people come, when the React community say, oh hi, can we talk about how I can use a MongoDB database in my React app? how can I can consume it using MongoDB database in my React app. And before you know it, there's like various conversations being thrown, being going on, and people are like, okay, this is how to do it. Okay, I have an idea. I've done this before. So this is how they put out the tutorial. This is how to use MongoDB and React in whatever for whatever situation that you are in. So this actually creates much more a broader range of community of collaboration rather than internally, but also within other communities. So it's very, very important for collaboration. Now, developers will feel like their voices are heard. This is very, very important. You know, when you have a community, you need to give everybody the sense of you actually can drop your opinions without feeling, without feeling bad. So when everybody in a developer ecosystem, in a developer community is giving the voice to actually say what they want to say on their, like, politely, of course, positively, of course, of a drop their opinions, and they see it actually in action, that creates a very, very nice feeling, a sense of like, okay, I actually can make a contribution, I actually can make a suggestion, and I'm actually heard. It's really, really, it's make sure that the dynamics in the community is actually great. So at every time, nobody would be reserved to want to talk, right? Nobody will be reserved. So when you take an open source community takes developer relations seriously, all your developers would feel like their voices are heard. It's very, very important when you listen to the community. Now, it creates a healthier community. For like I've mentioned, collaboration is part of an LDM community. When community members, their voices are heard and their feedback are taken into action, it also makes the community healthy. So this could this like there are a lot of like other really, really interesting points as to why OSS community should care about developer relations, but these are like based on my experience. These are like the most important and interesting parts that I feel like open source community should really, really take into focus when it comes to the why. Like, why should we do it? Why should we take developer relations seriously? So I hope I've been able to convince community leaders in various open source communities that this is why you should care about developer relations. So on to the next section of the talk, which is how do we, okay, so for example, I am a community leader. Okay, now I listen to your talk. I understand everything you said. I want to really pay attention to developer relations as an open source community. I want to take this feedback back to the community leaders and to the community itself to, okay, let's make sure that we take developer relations very, very seriously. Now, the first thing, like I always mention, is listening to the community. It's very, very interesting. It's very, very important also for you to make sure that you are listening to your community. The community is very, very important in every single thing, because these are the people that make sure that that community exists. The community, the unit of a community of a developer community is a developer, which is just one person in that community. So the unit of a developer community is a developer. So listening to the community, hearing their voices, okay, we want to be able to make certain API calls, and this is how we do it now, but we don't like it because it's not scalable. Take it into consideration and look at it. I mean, it's voluntarily, of course. Open source communities are usually voluntarily, but then, like I said, what doing is what doing well, right? So take it into consideration and see how well we can do it. Even if you're not going to implement that feedback at that particular point, just making sure that we actually heard, right? We would take this particular feedback into consideration is very, very, very important, even though you're not even going to implement it at that particular point. So that's one way you can pay more attention. Another way is, as an open source community, you need to understand what you're trying to achieve. So it's great if you finally want to, invest in developer relations. It's great, right? It's great if you want to take your time to, pay attention to developer relations. But personally, generally, what are you trying to achieve with this particular point of action that you're trying to do? Is it that, are you trying to get more tutorials for your developers? Are you trying to make sure that everybody can participate easily? Are you trying to get more people to tell their stories? So understanding what you're trying to achieve would basically give you a long-term goal, just so you can have a map, a mind map of okay, this is what we are trying to achieve. How do we do it? It makes the whole job easier. So there's that. Then you can also learn from other OSS communities, getting involved, getting developer relations right. The Vue.js community, React.js, Drupal, Gatsby, and I mentioned Gatsby for a reason. Gatsby was a fully blown open source community before it even became what it is at the moment. So I like to mention that because they got it right initially, and they're still getting it right though. Don't misquote me, but yeah, I like to just mention Gatsby. So learning from other open source communities, getting getting developers right, developer relations right, will make you see, okay, these are like very, very different points I can learn from, and these are very, very interesting experiments, key points that I can do. So the thing about developer relations is that there's no right way to do it. Like there's no set. If anybody tells you that this is the sure way to do developer relations and get it right, they are probably very, very inaccurate. They are definitely inaccurate. So developer relations, really getting it right, is basically about experimentation, trying, reiterating different steps, trying out different to see what works for you and your company, what works for you and your community. So when you try to learn from other open source communities, you get various points that you can try. Okay, let's say Gatsby is doing weekly webinar and getting someone from their community to talk about how they're using Gatsby in their workplace. Can we try that too and see how many people can do it? React is doing this. Can we try that too and see how many people do it? It's basically is a lot of work, but it's very, very worth it. So developing a strategy. So you need to actually develop a strategy. After you've understood what you need to achieve, after you've tried to learn from other communities, the next thing you need to do is actually to develop a strategy. Okay, so what ways can we attract more developers to our community? What ways can we make sure that everybody in the community is catered for? What ways can we make sure that everybody in the community's voice is heard? And how can we make our software even better? Right? Because the thing about open source is that for you to actually take your time voluntarily to work for free on a particular software for God knows how long, it shows that you're very passionate about it and you can really do anything to make sure that everybody using it is comfortable. So taking your time, the community leaders take their time to develop a strategy, and okay, we need to be doing weekly newsletters. We need to be developing this amount of tutorials every month to make sure that everybody are covering every concept of that particular software. We need to make sure that we are giving talks about this particular software XYZ in various conferences. We need to make sure that this is just the foundation you need to really lay for getting developer relations right. You need to do that, and once you have a strategy, then you can keep reiterating various steps and seeing what works for your community. And don't get it wrong. The way developer relations is it changes, right? It changes with time, especially when the way COVID has changed everything. We have to create an avenue for change. So if 2 years ago attending in-person conferences was the way to get word out, to talk about what you are doing, how your community is doing, and teach people, and having monthly, weekly meetups physically to see people. Currently, you cannot exactly do that anymore because of COVID, right? So it changes the whole dynamics of how you should do. So now you are thinking of virtual platforms you could do it, you could even have less in-person meetups because of COVID, how you could impact more people virtually. So you need to like always have a strategy developed, even though it's not future proof. Like I said, developer relation is mainly about experimentation. Even though it's not future proof, you just need to take your time, to keep reiterating, but having that foundation, that initial strategy is very, very important. So do not be ashamed to fail. So if you are a community leader, you're a bunch of community leaders, if you are a community, getting developer relations is not exactly very easy. It takes some people could take a year, it could take 2 years to actually get it right. It's really, really difficult, right? But the thing is, you reiterate, and you come back again to get it. So do not be ashamed to fail. A lot of failure will happen. You might not see the amount of feedback you're expecting, right? But with time, these things change. So do not be ashamed to fail. And lastly, you need to keep experimenting till you get it right. Like I said, it's all about developer relations is all about experimentation. Personally, that's what I believe. You need to keep trying out various ways. Okay, how well could we to this year? Can we change the way we have meetups this year? Can we change the platform we use to reach out to people? It could be IRC, it could be Slack, it could be Discord. What really works for your community? You need to keep experimenting to make sure that it sticks. Once it sticks, then 90% of your problems is solved. So you need to also do that. So that's about most of my experience, like working in an open source community and doing developer relations there. That's mostly what I can share, right? If you need, like, if you need to go deep in it, you might want to check the article I posted there at the beginning of it, so I don't take too much time, even if I'm okay. Have like so how to build an effective developer relations program in an open source community. So I already talked about how to get it right. How to I gave advices rather. I really did not give an action plan, and which is something I never really like doing. Not giving advice without an action plan. Everybody can give advice, but in your experience, how did you do it? Right? I can say, okay, I am, for example, let's say I am a very, very, let's say I'm a very, very um achieved person academically, and I'm telling people, you need to read hard, make sure that you read hard without really telling them this is the way my reading plan is. I read twice a day, I read after classes, so I like to give solutions rather than just advice and preferring advice. So how to build an effective developer relations program in an open source community. So let's explore that. Now, the first thing you need to do basically is to understand the demographic of your community. When I mean demographic, I mean skill level. I mean region, right? Skill level region. You need to understand that, okay, these are the amount of people that the skill level of my community. This is where most of my community members are: Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, and whatever region that exists in the world. So you need to have that data, to make sure that, okay, if I'm putting out a 10 minute course, right? I mean, people in Europe, people in America will not understand this, but I'm giving you this particular advice based on someone that is in Africa, which is quite underdeveloped compared to Europe and Africa and America. So something like internet is very expensive, right? It's really, really expensive here. So many people cannot do certain things. So if I put a 10 minutes video out for people in the US and maybe in Europe, it's fine. I probably sorted out their free Wi-Fi everywhere so they can watch this video and it's fine. But people in Africa, Nigeria, Togo, Zambia, these are like countries in Africa, they do not have that much flexibility. They do not have that flexibility to be able to watch a 10 minutes video, and watch a 10 minutes video and they'll be fine, right? So you need to, okay, do we summarize this video into like 2 minutes, 1 minute, and make sure that they get the full gist? Do we instead write articles because they can load it once and they read every single thing? So what I usually used to advise is do a bit of both, right? Make videos and write an article about the video. It's very, very important to make sure that you're inclusive. You get every single person. You understand your demographic. So make sure that you understand the demographic of your community before you make certain decisions. It's very, very important. Now, provide feedback avenue for folks in your community. Like I said, listening to the community is very, very important. It could be a Google form. It could be a particular channel on your community Slack or your community Discord or wherever the community have conversations. So providing feedback avenue is very, very important so people can tell you what they feel about certain things. It's very, very, very important. Now, make your community inclusive and accessible, like I just talked about. It's sort of related to understanding demographic of your community. You need to make sure that, okay, this particular blog post I'm putting out on a certain release, right? This is something that I've noticed. This is something that I've noticed open source community fail at consistently. You are putting out a blog post, right, on certain release. You need to understand that not every single person um, um, not most of your most of there's developers that use screen readers, right? The developers that prefer to listen, to an article rather than reading. People with dyslexia, so people with hearing seeing issues, people with color blindness. These are like, you need to make sure that your community it's a lot of work, right? But it's definitely worth it. So I've seen so many big open source community put out blog posts on major releases, and there's no voice, there's no like voice, there's no voice version of that particular blog post. So there's no I think I've seen popular newsroom have a voiceover of that particular blog post. Open source communities don't do that. I've seen a lot of them that don't do that. You're making major releases, you need to be able to put voice. It's difficult, it's a lot of work, but it's very definitely worth it. Put a voice recording of that particular article, so people that do not want to read can listen. Very, very important. It's very, very important that people, so you can make your community inclusive, like, hey, everybody is welcome here. Our community is very, very accessible. Our software is very, very accessible. Please come in and let's all let's all make things work. It's very, very important. Our community reward programs, this particular is tricky. The way it works in corporate organization is, they throw a lot of budget on this. They give you money for articles, they give you money they give you swags, they give you so many things, right? This, like, in a corporate world. But in an open source world, is different. Like, there's no much budget, there's literally no budget. So what our advice you can do is highlight your highlight your champions, the things like, spotlights. This particular person has been very, very active in the XYZ community, in our community. So we are giving him he or she or they a special shout out on our Twitter page, on our community Slack. People would feel love and would want to do more. So you can actually reward your community without spending a dime. It's very, very doable. So that's my opinion on that particular thing. So great documentation for the technology. I've seen really, really great documentation. I've seen really, really bad documentation. So, and the way the documentation works is it's very, very important, right? It's very, very important. People cannot use your software. Your software becomes inaccessible when your documentation is poor. So creating great documentation for your technology, highlighting every single part that you probably would need, people would need to understand to be able to use that software properly. It's very, very important. Now, collaboration with other communities, like I mentioned with the whole React and Mongo thing, try your best to see, okay, I know that a bunch of our community members are using XYZ technology with our technology, which is also open source. Reach out to, the community leaders and say, hey, do you guys want to, do you folks want to come on a live stream, to talk about the integration between XYZ and XYZ? It's fine. That way you can even do more advocacy for your community in that particular community. So you are getting reach for free, right? You are getting more reach. The community is getting more visibility for free, right? So because you are communicating with another community, that people in the other community can see what your community is doing. So you are getting more reach for absolutely free. Now, more tutorials, more use cases. Like I keep mentioning, you need to cover as much use cases as possible, because every day people check Stack Overflow. You need to reduce the amount of people that actually check Stack Overflow to use your community software. So more tutorials and more use cases is very, very important. Now, organized talks and webinar. This might not be feasible because not so many open source community have the kind of budget for this, right? But one way you can do it, of course, is to get other sponsors and do this. But doing this is actually very interesting and very, very important. So it's something that is worth looking at. And now, how to measure success. Now, this is the most controversial. I would say it's the most controversial part of developer relations. Okay, I mean, we've heard every single thing you want to see. We've invested so many amount of time, hours into this particular, this particular concept, this particular action. How do we measure that what we are doing is actually working? How do we measure that we're gaining value for what we are doing? Personally, I would say something different if I'm talking about, corporate companies, large, big tech and XYZ. What I would say is my personal advice is don't measure success. do not measure success. It will discourage you. Do not try to measure success. Just do it. With time, you will get value you will actually see the value of whatever you are doing. Sorry, give me a second. I need to take water. So yeah, so do not actually measure success. With time, you will see, because it's an open source community. What are you measuring success for, please? You are putting so much time into doing this. The community is putting so much time into certain initiatives. So how do we measure value? Don't do it. Just do it. Don't measure success. Just keep doing it. With time, you would notice it by yourself that, okay, this is actually the number of people in the community have actually increased. The number of we're getting lesser issues, we're getting lesser complaints. That way, you're basically seeing that the efforts you're putting towards making sure empowering your developers in the community is actually paying off. So do not measure success. Now, instead, measure impact, growth, and quality of your community. We've put, what I mean by don't measure, don't look at numbers. Numbers are like really, really funny. Numbers are really, really funny. So what you should be looking at is impact. Okay, since we started this, how many, lesser complaints that we've had over the months, how many people are actually talking about certain things, since we've made sure that everybody has a voice. So how many people do we have? It's very, very interesting, right? It's very, very, it's like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm definitely not doing that. When I mean numbers, I'm talking about clicks, YouTube views, all those funky numbers that we use in the corporate world should be different from this. Your utmost care should be the developers, the community members that you have. What you're doing is impacting them. It's very, very important. You should do it, like, since you've come in to build this open source projects voluntarily, you should care about people using it, really. So if your developer relations effort is successful, your community members will tell you, right? You would see people give shout outs like, thank you so much to everybody in the community. With the help everybody I'm getting so far, I've been able to do XYZ. This way, the community members will tell your story, will tell the community story, rather than you or the community leaders doing the work, right? So the community members will always tell the story if the developer relations effort is very, very successful. And lastly, I think this is the last slide. Do not be big on so much success and numbers. Instead, just make sure to provide care for new and existing community members through the educational content and overall developer experience of your software. Do not be so big on success and numbers. Just do it. Just make sure that the people in your mind are, how can I empower my community members? How can I make, how can we, rather, I've been using a lot of singular, how can we make the community members feel like we actually care? And through educational content, you could do that. Overall developer experience of the product, you could actually do that. And that's about it. Thank you so much for listening. I know I rambled a lot. I know I said a lot of things. So, and yeah, this is like basically most of my opinion. So thank you so much. You need to reach out to me, talk about anything. You can reach out to me on Twitter at @kuda_black. GitHub, everything is there. My personal website, show.xyz, and my email, last name, first name @gmail.com. So thank you so much, everybody. And it's always a honor to be at All Things Open. I hope I am able to come physically next year, fingers crossed. And yeah, that's basically it.